Hello, welcome everybody. My name is Martin Lovers. Welcome to Webinar Wednesday. I'm the Chief Trend Watcher of Supply Chain Media. You may also know me as the Editor-in-Chief of Supply Chain Movement, European Quarterly Magazine, and also a website, LinkedIn group. And I'm also the architect of the IT Supply Map. You might know it. We will refer to it later. The coming hour in this live webinar, we have an exciting and uh, interesting conversation about S&OP, sales and operations planning and execution. Very important. So next to me, I have a specialist on this matter. So to introduce him, this is me on the left, and you see is on camera briefly, and later on we switch off and we go to the matter at hand. So to the right, that's Hans van der Rift. He's partner at Involvation since 2008, I believe. And you also have been program manager at Unilever, implementing SAP APO, if I'm right.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, I worked at Unilever for about 15 years in supply chain management, and as the last 4 years I was a plan program director responsible for the planning processes in Europe, including the APO rollout. So still highly relevant, although the application is slowly dying.
Yeah, we'll get to that. So some household manners. This webinar will be recorded, and the PDF will be made available afterwards within 48 hours or sooner. And everybody's on mute, so the whole audience is on mute. But feel free to ask questions, and to do that, you have two options: either to use the chat function on the right-hand side, but I prefer that you would use the Q&A function. You see these question clouds on the right, so I can track down the questions, and even you can vote on questions. So you can even upvote the questions. So feel free to ask these questions, and if these questions are in line of the discussion I will be having with Hans, I will ask these questions right away. But we also have a Q&A at the end, so beware of that. And afterwards, we have an extra 30 minutes to explain this. We will be in the lounge. So at 5 o'clock CET, Hans and myself will be at table 1 in the lounge. So you feel free to join us to have an after talk afterwards. And you can ask more questions about S&OP and S&OE. All right. This for now. I'll introduce Hans later, and now we'll switch off the camera so you have the opportunity to enlarge the screen even, and not to be distracted by our faces anymore. All right. So Hans, to explain a bit what Involvation is doing. So this is the SCM consulting supply map. So Supply Chain Media has positioned all kind of supply chain and other consultancies, the big four, the strategy consultants, but also Involvation. So you see it on the left hand side. Um, Specialize in S&OP, but also in learning. You are the developers of the Fresh Connection and the S&OP game, I would say. But also you have done some new stuff, research on resilience. Maybe you can explain a bit more, Hans.
Yeah, thanks, Martijn. That is exactly correct. So we are a consultancy based in the Netherlands, and we specialize in supply chain management in general, and S&OP, IBP specifically. I think I don't know, 70-80% of our revenues probably somehow are linked to those topics. And the topic that's come up more recently, that we've added because we believe there's quite a lot of synergies, is supply chain resilience. Now, why did it pop up? I think I'll make the obvious statement anyways. I think it's come on the agenda of many companies, where we all assumed that the supply side used to be quite robust. The demand side was quite predictable, and the past few years that has completely changed. And that unpredictability, that volatility has entered the S&OP IBP sphere, obviously.
Mhm.
And we believe also needs some more addressing than only between brackets the IBP view, but also a more structural view on how do we make our supply chains robust, which now we call resilient.
All right, and maybe this year later we will publish more like insight research you're doing with some universities. And another thing is that you are quite involved in the supply chain software selection for a lot of company, especially in S&OP, and that will fold out later on when we talk about systems and processes.
Yeah, we'll touch upon that later. I think we always make a big point of not making S&OP or IBP projects, turning them into IT projects. But
Hmm.
having said that, there is no supply chain planning in general without IT, obviously.
Hmm.
So if we can, we try and avoid moving in that direction. But actually, in quite a few cases, we still need to go there. Now, why are we always hesitant? Because it takes a while before you from deciding to having a system live. So if we can avoid it, we can make much more progress. But in I think most of the cases, somehow IT comes somewhere pops up in projects, and sometimes also we are asked to do selections specifically or help implement S&OP solutions. So it's definitely an area that we get involved in quite a bit.
Yeah, but to wrap up on this matter, you are independent, so you don't have any specific service lines related to specific vendors.
No, no, and that's always that's correct, and that's always a bit of a challenge because we, on the one hand side, try and build very good relations with basically as many as possible, as many vendors as possible, because we need to know a bit more about their solutions than just the website talk.
Hmm.
So we talk to them a lot, build good relationships, but we always make a big point about being and remaining fully independent, because otherwise we believe that we cannot do any proper selections anymore, and we do want to do them. Therefore, this emphasis on independence.
All right. Okay, let's talk about supply chain planning, and maybe you can explain the different horizons and hierarchies in planning as a whole.
Yeah, great, thanks. I think that's a nice bridge to the next topic. And what we have brought here is really different areas. And you mentioned supply chain planning, but I think supply chain planning really starts with the business planning. And in fact, what we really push for, if it's not already there, is that any company that is talking or thinking about S&OP or IBP really should also have a strategic plan, a rolling,
Hmm.
because it's going to be an important tool and threshold to make sure that we know what we are going to base our decisions on that we're
Hmm.
going to take in the S&OP process.
And then that will out of that you will derive an annual plan.
Yeah, so what you see here is really focusing on, let's say, the business planning and then the financial performance cycle, a very high level, obviously, starting with the strategic plan, and then, I mean, any serious company obviously has an annual budgeting plan, typically for the next year, that sort of sets the financial boundaries that we will need to adhere to. Now, why did we put it there? Because we believe that S&OP and IBP, the more advanced, more financial version of S&OP, really can play a very big role. One is in realizing your annual plan, and two, even more importantly, is to help you realize your strategic plan. Um, and we make this point very often because if companies have a strategy, what you find is that, I don't know, 70, 80% of the employees don't really either know the strategy or don't see exactly what their role would be in realizing that strategy. They can't create a link.
Hmm.
And we believe that the S&OP process or the IPP process can be a fantastic handle to build that link.
Yep. And finally,
Yeah, and then finally, S&OE, which really seems like a very small area here, because it focuses on the short term. S&OE stands for Sales and Operations Execution, focusing on the next 3 months. Now, why did we build this planning hierarchy? Is because we don't believe there is an S&OE without having a solid S&OP and IBP process in place. And really, what this little red circle is doing, ellipse is doing, is trying to execute the plans that have been defined in the S&OP IBP cycles. Now, the S&OE has popped up as a term only quite recently in the past few years. It effectively it was always there, and we will talk about it. Why it's been, we believe it's gaining in importance has been gaining importance recently.
Mhm.
And we'll talk about later why we believe it's really an important area of development.
If you look at this graph, there seems to be a small gap between SME and S&OP, a circle of ellipse. Is it on purpose?
No, I think what I'm trying to point out is that there's you see two axes. One is the time axis on the
Hmm.
horizontal, and then there's the vertical with the aggregation levels, where S&OE, because it's more short term, you will need and know more details,
Hmm.
where S&OP IBP really focus on a more aggregated level. So yeah, there is a gap, not in time, so they're really there's sort of a handover
Yeah.
between S&OP and S&OE. But in terms of aggregation, you really drill down to in the end, to the end level of detail, because SNOE is really about execution.
Maybe you can talk a bit further about this handover.
Yeah, I think that's a nice bridge. So why is there a handover? Again, we see horizontal axis the time, but now the vertical axis looks at impact. So what can we still do? So what do you decide upon? And what you see is really three periods. Again, a little bit theoretical maybe, but if you look at the horizon starting from the right-hand side, what we call the liquid period,
Hmm.
a year or so, or even further out, this is the period where you can still do anything. If you want to change your capacities, if you want to implement new product lines, if whatever, from the business side or from the supply chain side, basically everything is still possible because there's still time. And the closer you get to that, the more difficult it gets to change things. So what we call the slush period, typically the S&OP IBP horizon.
Hmm.
Part of the things, I mean, your strategy is done. You should know it. Your main resources, your main customers, your portfolio is more or less has been decided. But still, there's still quite a lot that you can do to, for example, balance demand and supply, to close your gaps, to do the financial alignment. And the closer you get to that, the more constrained you're going to get in making changes.
Hmm.
And where S&E comes into the picture is what we call the frozen period. And frozen is maybe a bit too harsh a statement, but it is the period or the planning horizon where if you still want to make changes, it requires manual interference.
Yep.
Because you basically move into, it's already said, into the lead time area, where the end-to-end lead time of your supply chain is longer than your planning horizon. So if you change anything, it's going to have an impact.
Yeah. And one comment from my side, two things. This liquid period, is also getting shorter. I think, when we move on beyond the horizon on the liquid, it could be even foggy, not knowing anything.
No,
So I think that even the liquid period is getting more fuzzy and foggy anyway. That's one thing. And the other thing is this frozen period. There's a lot of talking about nearshoring, and in the end, nearshoring should shorten your lead time. So in that sense, it could shorten your frozen period.
yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's if you look at these three phases, and there of course there are no hard boundaries between them.
Hmm.
And like you were saying, there's really two courses of action that you can take for any of the boundaries. And that is one, you can look at the way, how do you plan? So we will talk about planning execution or S&OE later in this session. And definitely you need to do that. So how do we decide? What do we do? What do we allow? What do we not allow in the very short term? But what, of course, is even more important and often forgotten is the question: can we reduce lead times? So why do we have this frozen period of 2 or 3 months? And now you mentioned nearshoring. If I have a supply chain that's focused on efficiency, with long lead times, with products that sit in containers for 6 weeks on the boat, this frozen period really is frozen. There's nothing I can do.
Hmm.
Now, nearshoring is maybe not an extreme example, but at least a very easy to understand example of where we could reduce lead times, thereby reducing the frozen period, giving and thereby making my supply chain much more responsive, making my S&OE process actually less important, because that we can still react even in our S&OE period. And this is really much more effective. If we can reduce the frozen period to only a few weeks, well, fantastic. Let's do that.
Yeah, I got a question from the audience. How do you regard stacked lead times? You know, in a frozen period. So which lead times do you consider to be in this frozen period?
Yeah, yeah, it's effectively, in theory, it's the end-to-end lead time. So from all the way from your suppliers, ordering raw materials, down to how long does it get for you to get your products to your customer. So that's the, let's say, formal answer. But I think we all know that that period is not frozen. You can still respond.
Yeah,
So somewhere there is a bit of a grayish area between this slush and frozen period, where the changes that you make in demand that are outside, let's say, what you anticipated using your safety stocks and your let's say standard ways to still to counter deviations.
hmm,
Um, but for example, if demand goes up more than you had expected, can you still react?
yes, yes,
And that's exact. And if you can't really anymore, then you really come into the S&OP horizon.
yeah. And that is also what this extra bubbles are explaining, how to address these.
Yeah.
And if you look at, we all know that S&OP is a decision-making process, and of course you need some IT, but mainly it has started out as a decision-making process. So maybe we can talk about the different kind of decision-making processes.
Yeah, no, I think that's thanks. So this slide contains a bit of detail, but we're not going to go through all of that. There's one thing that you see is that again the same or similar periods where S&OE, IBP, or business planning come into the picture.
Hmm.
But what is really relevant and the point of this slide is that S&OE is a process that's there for two main reasons. One that you were just explaining it, that was it is the decision-taking process to execute the plan that has been defined in IBP, in S&OP IBP. So that's one, and that's why the process exists. Um, but it also has a second, maybe a bit less obvious objective, and that is it enables the S&OP IBP process to focus on the midterm.
Yeah,
And it's probably obvious, but I'm still going to make the point that what we see very often in S&OP or IPP processes is that we've got this, we basically designed the whole process, we build the tools, we get the senior people at the table, we did the change management, it all works. And then they start talking about what happened yesterday and what's going to happen in 3 weeks' time, because that's all more urgent and it's really high on the agenda. And then you really miss the point.
yeah,
On two sides, because those guys and girls don't know about the details, so they shouldn't. What's their added value in at that level of detail? But also, more importantly, is they might miss the focus on the midterm, which is what they should be deciding upon.
yeah,
So S&OE and S&OP really go hand in hand, where S&OE really focuses on the short term, and S&OP IBP thereby gets freed up from all those details. You should
yeah.
really not talk about the next 2-3 months.
Yeah, yeah, and maybe, and now we'll get later on in the next slide about the specifics on the differences between S&OE and S&OP. But what we saw last 2 years, especially 3 years, is that the cycle of S&OP, a monthly cycle where you have a weekly meeting from portfolio, demand planning, supply planning, and financial consolidation. And all in all, it might took too long for companies to adjust and to respond. But basically, sometimes they want to speed up a higher frequency of the meetings, but were they not interfering with this S&OP
Yeah, yeah. To some
differences?
extent, that happened. So again, the last 2-3 years were abnormal, hopefully, but
Yeah,
maybe it is the new normal. We don't know. But of course, what happens during times of crisis is you get more focus on the short term. So if you're not sure that you're going to get the products that you will be selling in 2 months' time, yeah, then even senior management will turn their attention to that,
yep,
and they should. That's fine. So during times of crisis, you can expect, and that's exactly what happened, that also the companies with a professional S&OP or IBP process focus more, become more myopic, and they really become short-term focused because they had to.
Yeah.
Maybe even they increase the S&OP frequency. It could be.
Yeah.
But now that we are going back to normal, that should change back towards, hey, let's have a normal, slow monthly cycle, focusing on the big points, and as new cycle that's really agile and that focuses on the short term.
Yeah. Maybe this slide explains it a bit better. Maybe you can go through the main differences.
Yeah, yeah. So I think that if you, it is really common sense. So I don't think you will see any big surprises here. But if you look at the key differences between the two processes, they're linked, heavily linked, but still they're also quite different. Is that S&OP IBP, we really say it's predict, plan, prepare. So this is really where we create the context where S&OE can excel.
Hmm.
Because in the SD horizon is really sense to respond. What happens? Do we see changes? Let's respond. How do we react? Um, so let's go through the list. So if you look at the main objective of S&OP IBP, that this is where the initial planning hierarchy slide already made to the introduction. It
Hmm.
is the objective is to deliver the strategy, the company strategy, not the supply chain strategy, but to enable the financial annual plan, but also to deliver the strategy because that's where we create the link. And S&OE, as said before, is really to deliver the S&OP plan.
Hmm.
So they go hand in hand, but the focus is completely different. Um, where S&OP focuses on meeting demand, constraining demand by exception. So in the long term, 6 to 9 months out, we'll try and do anything, and we still can do quite a lot to avoid constraining demand. But in S&OE, it could be that you can't gear up your supply chain quickly anymore. So then things like allocation if demand goes up,
Yeah.
or if demand drops. I mean, what do we do with the remaining stocks? Can we still adjust supply? It's the focus really changes. Horizon we talked about. I think that's that same time periods go hand in hand with that. S&OP IBP should not be too detailed. That's one of the mistakes people sometimes make is that more detail is more accuracy.
Yeah.
And we don't believe that that's the case at all.
No.
It is, yes, you can be accurate, but it doesn't mean that you're going to be accurate at SKU level 18 months out because that doesn't make sense.
Yep.
So aggregation in products, in customers, in time, in vendors, in manufacturing will focus on not on individual lines, but on technologies,
Technology, you mean
markets.
factory and plants, I think.
Correct. Yeah,
Yeah.
correct. So if I have only one factory with one line, then it's the same. But if
Yeah.
I'm a multinational with I don't know, producing ice cream and I can produce the same products in multiple factories,
Yep.
then I'm not going to plan line level in my in my IBP. I'll focus on the technology.
Yep.
But short term, yeah, I want to know line A, what exactly is it going to produce? That you drill down. Um,
Um. Yeah. Go on.
Yeah, I think, and then I think the most ones are obvious. I think ownership is one that's also important because they have to go hand in hand. So in your S&P IBP, that's really a fairly senior process. It should be executives, probably middle management involved and driving the process. In S&OE, in the past few years, that shifted, but now that should really go down back to middle management owning it and the operational people running it,
Yeah.
because that's what they do.
Yeah, I got a question from the audience. Yeah, you can ask questions in a chat, but I prefer to have the questions in the Q&A functionality. Why? Because people can vote on it, and I can track these questions way better than in both areas. So, but there's a question: if S&OP and S&OE go hand in hand, and the only difference is the horizon, it's not the only difference. Why do we separate them? Why is there a need to have two separate processes instead of a continuum of planning and execution? This is especially important because of disruptions.
Well, yes, it is. I think it's still a good question. So yes, the horizon is the main point. That's, but as you can see in this table, that is it is only one of the differences,
Hmm.
and the other lines in this table are exactly they flow from that horizon. So the types of decision, the focus, the ownership, I mean everything changes. So is it a separate process or one process with two aspects? That's a matter of definition. But separating them, I think, is really important because if you make it one blur, then you can bet on it that the midterm will disappear. The short term will start to swamp the rest. And that's why making really two separate processes with different people, ideally,
Yeah.
different dashboards, almost everything different, is really enabler. One is for the execution, short term, but also for your tactical planning.
And I think, different people at the table, you want S&OP and especially IBP, that you have your financial officer and your commercial officer on board of it, because you want to drive the strategy and make it happen. So you probably and hopefully you have different people at the table in your IBP meetings.
Absolutely, yeah. So in both processes, finance will have a role,
Hmm.
but in S&OP IBP, it will be finance looking at, let's say, business KPIs, gap closing. Will we make our annual plan? Do we really link to our strategy? Are we enabling or making our financial goals? So that's what finance is doing there. On the S&OE side, is probably much more around scenario evaluation, about options. If we do this, what's going to be the additional cost?
Yep.
So there's also financial questions on the table, but from a completely different level.
Yep. Yeah, all right. And you talk about processes, and we need systems. You need data. You need dashboards. So when we look at the IT landscape in supply chain, this is our IT super map I have designed every year, and all the major players in Europe, established players, are on it. The SAPs of this world, and as you see through it, you have enterprise resource planning, warehouse management, transport management, and so forth, so on. Also, you have demand planning and S&OP. And lo and behold, there is no such software type called S&OE. So, and we'll get to that later. There is no software type called S&OE. That's not available. And maybe the only one that's close to it is order management, but order management is popping up out of the e-commerce world, omnichannel world. Retailers deliver out of the stores, out of the warehouse, direct to consumer. Maybe order management is as close as you can get to S&OE as a software package, but still it's not covering, because you have other kind of decisions. And maybe this slide is making it more clearer. This is what we have designed as a concept. So top down, you're looking at the market on supply and demand side, and you try to get a grasp of what's happening, scarcity all over the world. And especially when you have global trade wars going on, it's getting more and more tense. So you look at that area, the highest level. Then moving down, you have your IBP, you have your financial consolidation of your long-term plans, and then you have your S&OP, your supply and demand matching in volumes mostly, whereas IBP is more in financial matters. And then on the second floor, you have your S&E, you have your dispatching of all kind of orders, production, warehouse, transport, purchase, and replenishment orders. What you should do, but also on an exception base, we get there. And on the first floor, you have your transactions, your sales orders. So you have literally different levels of planning, of processes, and also this is how you can see how the whole IT application decks look like. Maybe you can comment on how you see this graph in what you have just explained, Hans.
Yeah, I think it really builds on maybe even also the first slide that we used around the planning hierarchy with the
Hmm.
different horizons. I think it's doing something very similar, but now linking it to the types of IT support systems that you're looking for, where the very short term it's all about transactions, and you could argue, well, that's also execution, but that's not the execution that we mean with execution today.
No.
But it's the level just after that, where S&OE is not about the individual transactions that you're managing in your ERP,
No.
but it is very detailed still, and therefore also what we'll see also in a number of the cases that we're going to discuss later is that the solutions that you will use and also the decisions that you're taking in the S&OE horizon are very context specific. It really matters what sort of company you are.
Yep.
And also there for the horizon, we typically say 2-3 months, but it could be, and if I'm a retailer, it's probably different than if I'm a chemical product producer or somebody else.
Yeah.
The solutions that you were just linking towards will be different, and the more you, I think, rise in this tower, the more generic your questions will be, and also the more probably standard your solutions can be.
Yeah. A question for the audience now. Where does the master scheduling sit in? I think that somewhere. I guess that with the MPS, but we'll get it later. Is more on the S&OP level.
Yeah, correct.
But yeah, but we'll get there. One final thing about this, we see a lot of new. I've tracked down a lot of supply chain software vendors, and basically, you get in the field of AI and machine learning. It's getting more and more fancy and intelligent. But my main warning is, match your S&OP software to your S&OP planning maturity. So don't buy a purple Lamborghini, and if you don't know how to drive it. So that's my warning, because don't go for the shiny objects if you don't know how to drive. So that's my warning. But now we go into some cases. So like you said, it's very context specific, and the devil's in the detail. So maybe we should discuss a few cases, and you can explain in detail where involvation was involved, what you have done. So maybe the first case is of Jacob Douwe-Egberts.
Yeah, that's a case that maybe some people have seen before, because Tineke Kok, who owns this case,
Hmm.
who's been doing a fantastic job here, worked on this case for quite a while, where, again, the same question that we are talking about now is on the table, actually initiated by their current
Sorry.
platform,
Yeah.
where they're still using at the moment APO, like many, where they know that it needs to that it will be phased out at a point in time. So they run a project to look at, well, what's going to be the future of our IT landscape.
Yep.
So their current situation, or not their current anymore, but their initial situation was like this. So everything being basically running in APO, where they realized that, hey, we've got these different horizons the coming weeks, but also year to go and next year. We're doing everything basically in the same platform. Is that really the way to go, and also the way that we should keep going in the future?
And,
Uh,
and 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 on the bottom side, you see O2C. I think that's order to cash.
yeah, order to cash, correct.
Yeah. And how does it include in this planning cycle?
Yeah, so order to cash, I think we saw that in your convergent tower. We
Yeah.
saw it in the cycles that the order to cash really is the execution cycle.
Yeah.
Very short term, this is really next day or a few days in the JDE case. And then the coming weeks, this is where we get into the SNUE area, where we still can change things. We don't have all the orders yet. It's still based on planning and uncertainty, but we know quite a bit already.
Yeah. And then another thing is what Tineke explained is, in the FMCG world, they heavily depend on Nielsen data, also, to look what's happening in the market. But the main thing is that's data 60 weeks old. So
Yeah.
all this sounds obvious, but these kind of things getting more and more important in the fast moving world.
Yeah, no, correct. So I think this is where, I mean, Nielsen data fantastic, but it's looking backwards.
Yep.
And we now know that there are what we call sales drivers, or leading indicators, sometimes very short-term leading indicators. The weather is mentioned very often, but that's one that's, I'm not so sure whether that for most of the companies is all that relevant.
Hmm.
But there
Hmm.
are indicators like maybe your current order portfolio, or anything that you can measure. Maybe your customers' orders that you can see already coming in, that give an indication of what you can expect is going to happen with your demand. And that was already the case, obviously, many years ago, but we really couldn't use that information. And now you see, I mean, there's a term called demand sensing, as you can see here.
Hmm.
Demand sensing, or maybe a phase a little bit longer than that, where and there are tools that can use basically that do demand sensing. What they do is they pick up information and basically analyze any of the data that's coming in, and see whether there are links between data that is measuring, for example, point of sales data, and your future order portfolio.
Mhm.
So you sense demand before it's going to really happen.
Yeah.
And in that way, now a good tool that JD started to use, Garvis, senses that demand and thereby improves the quality of the forecast in the very short term, next few weeks, and that's why we brought it in here. This is exactly your S&E horizon. You don't have
Yeah.
the orders yet. You can see what's going to happen with demand. If it's different than you expected, hey, what are we going to do?
Interesting. So this whole Garvis demand sensing is still in within your frozen period.
Really, it is, because if you look at their production cycle, at their if in the way how quickly they can get in coffee or whatever materials, it's going to take much longer than the weeks that you still have and that we're talking about. But at least if you see things demand changing, you can at least decide, hey, if demand's higher than we expected, what are we going to do with? Can we still do something with supply? One. And if yes, great, let's go for it. If not, how are we going to do, and how will we allocate our stocks, for example, based on what?
Yeah.
And because you still have a little bit of time, and if you have an S&OP process, we have this disciplined cycle where we get the standard data on the table, we have the right people to decide, and therefore you get this disciplined process where you then also use that data that's on the table now.
A question from the audience: how do you position maybe in this schema available to promise? I mean, or maybe you can do to later on a DSM case, but
Yeah, no, I think that's a good question. So if I've got demand sensing that tells me my expected demand more accurately than before, so there's one side of the medal. The other side of the medal is, hey, what about supply? If I only look at what I've got in my inventory today, then I'm missing part of the information. So if I already also know what my vendors are doing, what my suppliers are doing, what my own production is doing, and when I can expect my inventories to be available, of course, if I can combine them, I get a more accurate picture of the next few weeks. So it's all about information that is predicting or calculating my available inventories in the future, combining that with my more detailed and accurate forecast, and then S&OP process to decide how you combine the two.
yeah. Another question: will demand sensing and AI make a fundamental change to the standard S&OP and IBP process in the future?
Yeah, I don't think a fundamental change, but it will definitely help it. It will make it more accurate. So I think the process, the steps, the people at the table, the types of decisions you take, I don't think will change all that much. But of course, the information today, based mainly on history and then extrapolated with some smart algorithm and then maybe enriched by sales. If we get AI to, for example, recognize patterns where I can more accurately predict what's going to happen and more data driven rather than opinions of whoever, then I'm going to make better decisions.
Yeah, I had an interview, and we will publish about it in the next magazine about outside-in data. So Laura Cesare from Supply Chain Insight has started a project last year with, I think, 8 companies involved using external data. Apart from the matter, weather is leading indicators, industry indicators, but all kind of data outside of your normal forecasting area. So not statistical forecasting, but outside data, and we already have seen some great improvements of inventory allocation and accuracies, not just only forecasting accuracy, but accuracy on a inventory level. So yeah, and that's also mainly by the use of machine learning AI with external data.
Yeah,
Maybe
absolutely. Yes.
there.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, go on.
Yeah, so I think I mean, there's a few elements that are rapidly developing. One is tools that can recognize patterns and forecast better than we ever used to be able to. But the second aspect I think that you bring in is availability of data,
Yeah.
outside data that they can bring into my internal databases, or I can create a data lake with massive loads of information.
Hmm.
Combined with tools that are able to handle all that data, that's exactly what you see happening, where we can again not fundamentally change the process, but definitely fundamentally change the quality of the process.
Yeah, right. And maybe we should go over to the next case, because GDE is fast-moving consumer goods, and the next one is more upstream on the supply side. So maybe you can explain what you have done at this case.
Yeah, so I think this is a case that we did with DSM, that people know, I'm sure, as a company. This was a project for food specialties,
Hmm.
where the initial statement that is depicted here in this table was there was a conclusion that what they were doing was they had basically one planning process for the full horizon, 18 months rolling. And basically, what was happening is that they were asking their sales teams to give a detailed, basically SKU level plan, 18 months rolling.
Hmm.
I mean, not as extreme as I'm now painting, but just to exaggerate a little bit, but really pushing for all the detail. And the effect was that specifically for the midterm, they really had a very high effort process that looked like it was very accurate, but it was only really detailed. And they basically had realized themselves that what they were trying to do and pushing their sales teams for to get going, it was didn't really match with what they really needed. And so it was high effort, but not really bringing the added value for sales or finance or operations, because it was bringing lots of detail, but not lots of accuracy.
But one of the major point here is also related to the system, because SAP APO required a lot of details way in advance to run the system.
No, yeah, correct. I think that is, I mean, again, it was a little bit stereotyped, but what happens quite a lot is that is a mindset where the system says, a system like APO typically it demands all the details, because otherwise it can't do its calculations.
Hmm.
And if that's the case, that's the case. But the mistake that people sometimes make is that they then also say, well, our S&OP process, 18 months rolling, has to be at that level of detail, and that is the wrong conclusion. So what DSM decided is they said, well, we need to change our leading motto for being from let's become really accurate by adding all the detail,
Yeah.
which they really realized was it didn't actually make sense, because one, sales couldn't give all the detail. I mean, you can't know what's going to happen at the SKU level on a weekly basis, 18 months out. That one, but also what are you going to do with all that information? Nobody needs it.
No.
So that really went nicely hand in hand. So they then decided to say, well, let's change that leading motto. We keep it for the next 6 months. There we really need the detail. Let's focus on understanding. Let's communicate all the relevant details. Make sure that we have it in our systems, but also in our, let's say, S&OE, so that this is where we need the detail and also where we know the detail. But after that, and I've purposely made a bit of an overlap, really 3 to 18 months, let's make sure we are roughly right on the midterm. So let's get rid of all the details there. And the motto was, let's make sure that we, from a top-down point of view, understand what we believe is going to happen, build a forecast based on that really top-down, and not go to the detail. One, because we don't need it, and two, because we can't do it.
Maybe this graph is explaining it a bit more in depth.
Yeah, correct. So this is basically the same thing, but then in a bit more detail. So here, what you see on the horizontal axis is again is the time, going from a few weeks to several months to a few years.
Yeah.
And then on the vertical axis, the level of detail. So going from SKUs to really sold to customers, and then all the way down to the top to production lines and regions, etc. So we're more aggregated. And also what you see is on the right-hand side, that the very short-term focus is on value, or sorry, focus is on volume.
Hmm.
So this is where we really have supply chain talk. But longer term, where sales really is not thinking volume anymore, thinking value, is let's make sure that we also set up the process in that
Yeah.
way.
Maybe a question from the audience related to this, and maybe you can answer it, especially with this graph in front of us. What are the typical S&OE decisions versus the S&OP and IBP decisions?
Yeah. Okay, yeah, good question. And I think again, there's not a hard split. But I think in S&OP and IBP, you are focusing on your strategy and you basically work as much as possible with an unconstrained demand.
Hmm.
And the assumption is, why can you do that? Is because there is time. So why should we already constrain demand if we still have time to sort out our supply chain to enable the demand plan?
But
So
maybe that's an important point, because scarcity and capacity, how to build up new warehouses, factories, etc., or outsource them to new areas if you are growing and you need some extra capacity. So that's an important point. Do we have this unconstrained capabilities and capacities?
Yeah, well, and of course, there's going to be, and this is where we need the S&OP or IBP process to
Yeah,
decide. Hey, we still have the possibility, we still have time
yeah.
for the end of this year or maybe beginning of 2024 to organize more capacity, more storage capacity, anything required. We could hire more people.
Hmm.
But of course, there's going to be a cost side, and this is where it's not going to be the autopilot, right? It's not systems telling us what to do.
No.
So we get the scenarios on the table. We can actually enable the demand plan, the unconstrained demand plan, but it's going to be a cost.
Hmm.
Option one. Or are we still already now going to constrain our demand because we are not able or willing to invest all that money?
Yep.
But then we know it already now.
Yep. And then moving now to the short term, what kind of decisions are you making in the two left side columns?
Yeah, I think, and then that flows from that. So let's now assume that we decided not to invest in new warehousing and production capacity. So we know we needed to constrain demand.
Hmm.
So now it's all about executing the plan that S&OP has set.
Hmm.
But so if demand now is still different from what we expected, then on the short term, there's going to be short-term fluctuations. So there typically you get questions like, hey, should we do overtime this weekend? Should we get some temps in? So similar discussions, but that they much more detailed and there's also lower impact level. So they are similar but not the same. Where we on the right-hand side, the IVP horizon talked about quite significant decisions to be made, therefore also by the more senior people. And then in the short term, similar decisions, but then capacity is not let's do a new line, but do we get a few temps in this weekend?
Yeah.
Still trying to enable the demand again, looking at also cost impact of different scenarios, and then deciding, okay, what are we going to do?
Yeah. And maybe you can explain also what you have done with, at DSM on a solution level.
Yeah, so in DSM, that was quite a nice, not coincidence, but DSM is running OMP, and in OMP we found that it was possible to basically run both processes that were completely disconnected.
Hmm.
So the right hand side, the IBP horizon was top-down process, starting from value, then drill down, and the shorter horizon, so the next 6 months, was bottom up from the built up from the sales history, and then but also running in OMP. And OMP offers the option to run both processes in the same solution,
Yeah.
which is one from the implementation point of view, great, but also from a let's say connecting or reconciling the two at the boundary, of course, a really nice enabler. So that was a good, I wouldn't call it coincidence, but a nice choice of DSM to run OMP
Hmm.
because they could do it in the same application.
And what we see right now, because a lot of the FMCG manufacturing brand manufacturers like Mars and some others, Reckitt, have implemented Kinexis, and a similar way like OMP, what they call concurrent planning. They can move up and down like the elevator through the planning building tower we've seen earlier, on an MPS to a scheduling level, or even higher up with scenarios. So we see now in well. The vendor software landscape, there are more vendors creating this possibility to move up and down through IBP to S&OE.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point. So Kinexis has claimed the term concurrent planning,
Yeah.
and where that really comes to it and brings benefits is that they really use one large database for demand and supply. So there's not sort of a thing like in the system that you need to release the forecast to supply that then takes a month to run, for example, the whole supply plan. It is immediate. It's the same database. So if, for example, you run a scenario where
Hmm.
you say, well, that's what happens if demand does this or supply does this, and you get immediately you get the results of those of what the impact would be of that occurrence, rather than having to wait for a night or a weekend. So functionally, it sounds the same, but because it's in the same database and so fast, people will start using it.
Yeah, but still, you can do scenarios within the frozen period when you have different, things going on where you need to change what you have been planning in your S&OP IBP plan.
Yeah, absolutely. But the scenarios will change. And
Yep.
so, of course, I can run a scenario what would happen if I would have a new warehouse next week, but it's not so useful because I can't
No,
do it.
no, no, no. All right. And finally, we have been in the FFGD area with Jacob Douw-Egbert and DSM, more upstream. In a retail area, it's also different.
Yeah, no, correct. So I brought, because we made the statement before we started these cases that S&OE is really context specific.
Hmm.
So I brought one example, or actually a few examples that come from retail that are really very, very different. To show the example, but also to make that to stress that point that
Hmm.
S&OE in terms of solutions, in terms of decisions, is really isn't one thing.
No.
So this is an example of a number of fashion retailers. There's America Today, there's Shubi, there's Stitch, and they're all either using or experimenting with what they call store replenishment, and they're all fashion retailers.
Yeah.
And what's very specific in fashion retail is that you have at SKU level in a shop, you only have a very low number of products. So typically for at a color size level, so really the SKU level, there's maybe one or two.
Hmm.
So if you have a sale of I don't know, a medium-sized pair of socks, whatever, then I mean the next customer that wants the same size, well, it can't have it because it's out of stock.
Yeah.
So forecasting, so allocating your stocks to the right stores as good as possible, as accurate as possible, really will help you grow your
Yeah.
business.
Yeah.
And therefore, that they make a big for them that's really important. And what they are basically all doing with the solutions that are mentioned here. So there's Thunderstock, there's Where for Huey, there's Vitalization that Stitch is using.
Hmm.
They all do something similar, and that is that they forecast with an AI-based algorithm.
Hmm.
They forecast not the they don't let's say extrapolate the history, but they forecast the sales potential at shop level,
Yeah.
which enables them to more accurately allocate the stocks to the shops.
And it could be on also local circumstances that one store will sell more because they are open on Sunday, and in other areas they aren't.
That's exactly, and they
Yeah.
may be in a region where the population has a different mix.
Yeah.
Maybe the age difference is different. The ages are different, or the profiles are different, and therefore the shopping behavior is different. And they therefore at shop level allocate based on, of course, in the end, what happens in real life, but not on just hey, I sell one pair, let's send them another one, the classic one. But they say, hey, we sold one pair now. That's actually strange. So the potential must be higher than we thought. So let's send three pairs.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, and I see also on a local level, I'm living close to the German border with also Germans coming over to my hometown, and then all of a sudden when they have a bank holiday, they coming over, and that will drive up sales massively when the stores are open in the Netherlands and not in Germany.
Yeah, no, exactly. Yeah. So, I mean, and the more data you can give these tools, I mean, they will do the math for you.
Yeah.
So if you can feed them with information like that, then this is exactly what you mentioned, that leading indicators or driver-based forecasting. If we know events that we believe will drive sales volumes, then let's feed them to these algorithms, and they will pick up the correlations.
All right. Before we get to the Q&A, there's a final point. We mentioned IBP, and then we get to the S&OE, and IBP is a financial view of how to reach your goal, your EBIT, or your plans. So, what is the case with the S&OE?
Yeah, yeah. So we just rounded off a number of the case examples, and this was one slide that we decided to put in because it's a bit of a different twist, but it is a step that we believe is often forgotten. Typically as part of an IBP process.
Hmm.
So if we move from S&OP to IBP, then financializing the S&OP process is one of the big steps.
Hmm.
But what people quite often forget is that there's also a financial side, or there can be a financial side on the S&OE side. But not the same. So cashing up a demand plan for S&OE, I can do, but what am I going to do with it? But for example, the area where we believe it can reveal a lot of value is when we are evaluating scenarios. So in S&OE also, the short term, you could decide, hey, are we going to fly in additional products from Asia, or do we accept an out of stock?
Hmm.
That would be a cost-driven one, and that's maybe still a classical one. But if we are evaluating a number of options like that, which I would call scenarios, I could take the traditional supply chain view. So I always look at service levels, working capital, and cost,
Hmm.
the traditional triangle. Or I can take a more what I would call an IBP view or a business view, where we decide, okay, so what financial KPI are we actually optimizing? Are we going for growth? Are we going to maximize our margin? Are we going to maximize our EBIT? So it sounds like a subtle change, but actually it can give quite different decisions and make it more of a business process also on the short term than maybe a traditional S&OE.
Yeah.
Uh, and
Yeah.
stuff that then comes on the table is, well, very short term. So gross margin sounds very logical. Let's maximize gross margin. But I mean, if you know a bit about finance, gross margin contains all sort of, I mean, you deducted all the fixed costs. Well, fixed
Yeah.
costs are fixed.
Yeah.
Does it make sense?
Yeah.
So thinking about your financial driver, what exactly are we trying to optimize, is one of the design steps that again will be quite different dependent on who you are as a company.
Yeah, and one big element, in my opinion, is in the supply chain we talk about total landed cost or cost to serve, and a lot of companies don't have this cost to serve data on an SKU level, whereas in an SME environment you need this on an SKU level if you want to make decisions on that kind of detail.
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah. So I think one of the companies that is really king at this is DuPont, who have been using what they call assignable contribution rate for many years.
Yeah,
And that's what they do is really they strip all the costs that they can't really influence in the short term.
yeah,
And they only focus on the cost elements that they can really influence still. And you get surprising differences because of that decision.
all right. We have some questions, and I see that they're popping in. Too many to answer them all, so I invite you to join us at the table after the hour. We have the next 30 minutes. One other question is, what is the relevance of product segmentation and an S&OP and S&OE as part of the decision making process?
Yeah, I think again, good question. So product segmentation, customer segmentation, they are all, I think, they will help you to make what I would call sort of sensible, structured decisions rather than the sense of the day or the flavor of the day. So if you segmented your products and you, for example, say, well, these products are maybe not less important, but there are slow movers or they are less focused, you will probably avoid all sorts of crash actions on products where you maybe shouldn't have. So it really forces discipline and it will help you in the end deliver your strategy. If you are clear about your customers, clear about who is strategic, who is not. So what's my portfolio? What should I be carrying as products, etc. That's, I think, where segmentation can be a big help.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe a final question or not. One quick question: How to organize the best interface between SNOE and SNOP IBP? One person, one department, or also separated?
Well, I think in terms of overall process ownership, I would my first reaction would be let's keep it in one hand. But in terms of the people that are actually executing the process, I would split it.
All right. All right. There are a lot of more questions. So I would invite you all to join us at the table. We will be sitting at table one. Just right after this, screen will open up and you join the table, and then we kind of a Zoom meeting will be opening up. Next we have some more information, and in the link with the slides, you will get the link also to this subway maps, the consulting subway map, the IT subway map with the software vendors. And on the right hand side, we also have created together with Involvation an S&OP software map, not about the systems, but about the process and the steps and the decisions and how to organize it. This is more about Involvation. And with this, thank you, Hans, for joining me during this hour. So thank you for this. And you will join me at the table right after this.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you for listening in. A nice audience, great audience, nice turn up, and I hope to see you in a next webinar in 2 weeks. Hopefully I will see you there back again. We'll talk about leadership and resilience, how to organize that. But now I want to pause this, and we want to step out, and we will join, and we will go to the lounge. Thank you for now, and see you next time.